Above Replacement podcast. I'm your host, Adam Grossman. With us today is Lindsay Barnett. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, we really appreciate you joining the program. You have a different background than a lot of the guests that we have. So let's kind of go from, as I always like to say, let's start from the beginning. So tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I went to Northwestern. I went there for undergrad and for my master's, and I studied radio, TV, film, and got a minor in or a module in interactive arts and entertainment, which is essentially animation. And then I got my master's in elementary teaching. So all of that said, how do those relate? Those relate to exactly what I'm doing now, which is relaunching the Backyard Sports video game franchise and making great children's entertainment. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot, and particularly with the Backyard series, because I think it would be good for because I think a lot of students or a lot of our audiences who listen to this may have played those games historically. But
Sure.
before we jump into that, one of the things we do like to talk about in the podcast, you mentioned your teaching background.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about your teaching background and how your teaching background kind of became the pathway to, launching what is now Playground Productions?
Yeah, so I come from a long line of teachers. My mom was a teacher. She taught kindergarten, and then all through growing up, she was a preschool teacher. My grandpa was a professor for many years, and my grandma was an elementary school teacher. So I definitely come by it honestly, and I got to see these incredible teachers growing up, and on days off, like conference days and stuff, I'd go to my mom's class as a little kid and help out, and I just loved it. And I got to see how hard she worked and what she put into her lesson plans. And I just was very inspired by what my mom did as an educator. And I also felt like my mom was just such a selfless educator, especially with preschool. Like she'd put so much hard work in, and I think a lot of it went unnoticed, but ultimately she was so interested in that point of life and making sure that, getting all of the kids to reach their fullest potential when they're a little kid is so important. And so I got to learn that from a really early age. So that's kind of where my love of teaching came from, was watching my mom and my family. And I always wanted to study film and education because I don't know why, I just wanted to have both of those. Those are my two loves. And it's hard when you're 17 years old to like make the decision of what to study. And I was like, I love these two things so much. And ultimately I was like, maybe I'll be able to double major. And you couldn't double major for some reason in those two. But I was really interested in educational media. That was always my love and reasoning for starting in film and television. I loved shows and was very inspired by shows like the Peanuts and Snoopy, and Sesame Street and Arthur. And so that was really my passion as a undergrad. And then when I went to get my master's, it was really, that was the goal, was maybe I'll go and work at a show like Sesame Street or, some kind of educational media company. And I fell in love with teaching. I student taught, and I was like, my job is not done. My education is not done until I teach. And, I taught second grade, and it was such a great experience. And I wound up doing it for 8 years. So I loved it.
Yeah, and my mother-in-law, who I mentioned to you all, before we started recording, is here. She also taught second grade, so I have an affinity for people who teach second grade. So
It's the best age ever. I love teaching that grade.
yeah,
It just
yeah,
is like those students still, it's kind of the read to learn versus learn to read. And so it was just like their fascination, like they were finding themselves and so fascinated in so much, and still loved, getting to be in the classroom. And I really liked being a part of making school fun for them, because I think if
yeah.
you have a really good experience with school as a little kid, you continue to have it. If you have a bad experience with school as a little kid, it's hard to change. So I wanted them to come in with a good experience.
Yeah, and one of the things that I saw that was a compelling part of your experience is the experience during COVID and remote learning,
Yes.
how that played into what you're talking about, or one of the reasons you started Playground Productions. So we'll definitely want to talk about Playground Productions and then the history,
Sure.
but how did your experience in COVID and teaching during COVID kind of spur you into starting this new venture?
Yeah, it was a really crazy experience. Obviously no teacher signed up to be a remote teacher. But I taught in a Chicago public school that many of the students did not have computers. So when March 2020 hit, I only had a few kids that were able to actually learn right away. And so um, it was about figuring out how I could provide education for them when they might have had to wait until they could see it on their parent's cell phone or uh, share a computer with their sibling. And so I started recording a lot of content and paying attention to the content that was out there because maybe they could asynchronously learn something and not have to listen to, be able to zoom in with the class. So I just started to really think about educational media again. And I found some really great resources, but there were absolutely kind of gaps in the market. And so I started recording a lot of content as a teacher, and really taking a close look at what was out there for kids.
And then from that experience, right, you're talking about content for kids. So
Yep.
can you talk about, I think you started talking about a little bit, or at least alluding to about, so the reason to start Playground Productions from
Yep.
that experience and what does Playground
So
Productions do?
in my second year, and Chicago Public Schools did a great job of getting all of the kids at our school computers to be able to learn. But there was still, you don't want kids to be on the screen for such a long time, and you're figuring out different kind of ways to go about things. And um, I started looking in that time and listening to the types of content that my students were watching or interacting with outside of the classroom. And they were telling me, oh, I'm watching this at home with my family. And a lot of it was very adult, very inappropriate, and, not for second graders. And so I started to really think about like what is good content even outside of school that my students could be watching or interacting with. Of course, they have to be home, so you want them to be able to entertain themselves with something fun and hopefully something that's semi good for them. Um, and it was really the impetus for me to think about my own childhood, which was very, idyllic, and I had a great childhood. And I just started to think about all of the things that I love to watch and play. And so many of those TV shows and so many of those games were gone. And for me, Backyard Sports was the Backyard Sports franchise. Those were my favorite computer games as a kid. And when I was looking and saw that they were nowhere to be found, it really sparked my interest in going like, what happened to that franchise? And maybe there's something I could do with this here.
Yeah, I definitely wanted, because it's as you, I think, said in other places, a detective kind of case or detective story to get this all taken care of and figure out who owns
Yeah,
what.
yeah, yeah.
Can you just explain what for people who haven't played backyard sports or don't know what it is, can you explain what
Sure.
backyard sports was to the point where, you could be in position to be in the position you were in to potentially have a role in a franchise?
Yeah, so the Backyard Sports franchise was kicked off in 1997 with Backyard Baseball, and it was the most accessible sports game that was on the market. It was a point and click simple game with 15 boys and 15 girls of equal playing ability, that were all just playing baseball in the backyard. And that was the that was the game. It wasn't about being the greatest player of all time. It was really about the humor and comedy of these characters. And I loved these games because I was a particularly sporty little kid. And, I'm growing up in Chicago in the 90s, a time where you want to be like Mike. And absolutely was something where like got my sports love kind of started really early. But this was a game that came out when I was 5 years old, and I started playing it, and I fell in love with baseball. I had already fallen in love with basketball, but baseball then came from this game. And then soccer came out in 98 and football came out in 99. And those games made me soccer fans and football fans. And I'm to this day a massive football fan. And it is purely from this game. That was where like my real first introduction to football was. And all of that said, in acquiring the rights to the franchise, these actually were created under an educational company back in the 90s. I did not know that. But it was a company called Humongous Entertainment. They have a nice suite of educational games. And for some reason, the Backyard Sports franchise fit under that educational suite. And a lot of people are like, what is educational about it? But because it was so accessible, it actually taught the rules of sports to little kids. And so a lot of the millennials who have a fondness for this franchise and some, some elder Gen Z, they learned to play sports off of this franchise and might not even know that that was the reason why this whole thing got kicked off. So it really was like kind of I like to say like they disguised the vegetables and the dessert so well.
So what, obviously you mentioned it was under another company. What happened? I think at least originally there was some relationships, I believe, with, the major professional leagues. And then, obviously I think, those labs, the games, like there wasn't a game out for a while. What happened? Why was it, it had this benefit? Go ahead. I was gonna say,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
The games were under Humongous, and then Humongous sold the Backyard Sports franchise to Atari. And Atari, unfortunately, the Backyard franchise got caught up in their bankruptcy at Atari. And so the rights went to another company. And then these two incredible guys who wound up getting the film rights, Ari Pinchot and Avi Savitsky, they were very much a part of the franchise still. They basically had gotten the film rights and spent a very long time to kind of bundle all of the rights together. And they also did a great job of hiding themselves. So I had to find them with a private investigator to find out who they were. But when I found them, we became really close and figured out a way to relaunch this franchise. And so that was really exciting about that.
Well, I don't want to skip over the private investigator part. So
yeah.
Why did you decide to hire a private investigator too? Why, if you could say, why were they so hard to find?
Okay, so first of all, I want to make this very clear. I've never hired a private investigator before. This was the first time and the only time. But I was at home during COVID and, I had done the internet search that everybody does to find out who holds the rights, and they were nowhere to be found, which I thought was like, I guess immediately got me even more interested. I was like, ooh, now it's a mystery. And, you're passing time in COVID. I'm like, this is a very exciting adventure for me to go on. And so I wound up calling one of the lawyers who had been a part of the original team. And they were like, that's so weird. Like it's really unfindable. We could hire a private investigator to track it down. And I was like, that just sounds so fun. Like maybe I'll be on a podcast one day and I'll be able to tell that story. And turns out it worked out, and they found these guys. And, sometime later we were able to get an awesome deal done and bring this brand back.
Yeah, and then definitely want to talk about the awesome deal done. But obviously it's a big step to say I'm interested in this. Is another step to actually start and launch a company and start to go down this path. And obviously hire the lawyers for this. So what was the decision point where you said, I want to start this company and focus on this instead of teaching?
It was really my love of TV and film and media for kids was still very much there. And during the COVID experience of just seeing the media landscape change for kids so much, I felt like this was the right time because I kind of looked at, what became Playground Productions as a bigger classroom. Like I loved being able to serve the 32 kids that I had every year, but maybe there was a way for me to teach and help even more kids. And so that was really what made me feel like, I could do something that reached even more.
And then, obviously it goes to, you decide you want to pursue this, you're combining multiple passion points that you have. But then, what were the steps that you took to get this off the ground? We have a lot of students who are potentially interested in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And so what did you do to decide, once you decided to do this, how did you decide to get this off the ground?
Well, first of all, want to go on the record. There's a famous quote that is, about teachers, and it's like, for those who can't do, teach. I hate quote. I hate it so much because I feel like teachers are the people that can do the most. If you need somebody to, manage a team or manage a budget or be able to stretch a dollar or set up a great lesson plan that's entertaining, those are your teachers. And so there were a lot of things about being an entrepreneur that, interestingly, teaching really prepared me for, because I went from a team of 32 kids to a team of 4, and I was like, oh, they're 4 adults, that's so much easier than a team of 32 children who are 7. So when you think about things like that, there was a lot from teaching that really prepared me for this. And I think I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and that's really important to kind of give yourself the confidence that you could do something. And I guess what I was most interested about looking at my family was for each of them to find something that they loved, and then being able to work in a field that they loved. That always was inspiring to me. And so that kind of gave me the confidence to be able to go, okay, well, maybe I could actually do this.
And you talked about a team of 4. So how did you bring in the team of 4 people to join you?
Yeah, so that was really interesting. Sorry. That was really interesting because my team came from, I found this one guy named Chris Waters, who was working at Seth Green's studio called Stupid Buddy Studios, doing adult animation, like things like Robot Chicken. And it's so funny that he and I became friends, and kind of we're looking at children's projects to do together because, of course, his background was in adult animation. But before that, he had done a lot of the DreamWorks properties, and he's a dad of 4, and he was ready to make the change to go into the children's space and really, make some content that his mom would be proud to watch. And so, I had this idea of, what if I could bring back this franchise, and finding someone who loved sports and loved children's media and was interested in doing things at maybe an untraditional way, getting things to market, and not necessarily going through a big company, but really was willing to like wear a lot of hats and be entrepreneurial. And he stepped up and was like, I would like to do this. I'd like to go on this journey. And so then after that, it wound up being, let's find other people who are like that, who really want to be at a startup culture, but a startup culture with a cool piece of IP that, might take off.
Yeah, and there's some interesting challenges about bringing back the game. I was reading there's some complicated technical challenges actually to bringing back the game. So you could talk about like, what does it literally mean to bring back the franchise, and how are you able to do it?
It's a great question. So basically, when I bought the franchise, there was nothing except for the IP. Like there was nothing except for the name and the characters, but it was going to be a start fresh. But I found this incredible developer called Mega Cat Studios. They're based in Pittsburgh, and they are really specializing in retro games and preservation. And so I talked to them first about preserving. Is there anything that we can do? I don't have any source code. I don't have anything from the original games, but I would love to create a game that is exactly the same and or has a really similar feeling. And they were like, we have our own proprietary technology to be able to bring back the CD-ROM games basically through reverse engineering and CD-ROM hacking. And so I was like, well, that is awesome. Let's do that. And so basically within a very, very short period of time, I was just, again, very lucky to find these guys who had the skill to do it, but they were able to bring back, we'll have 6 games by the end of this year, baseball, football, basketball, soccer, hockey, and backyard baseball 2001, which has the pros in it. And they were able to bring all of those back to modern devices. So computers and phones and things devices that didn't exist when the original games came out, which is really
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah, what was that process like? Right, obviously these games were developed before there were particularly smartphones or iPhones or Android. So how does that work, and how does the game get rendered kind of on these new devices?
It's something that kind of baffles me every time that they are able to do it or reach a new device, because I understand how being able to take the game and make it playable on a PC computer, that obviously is like a one-to-one translation, but being able to put it on a cell phone that like literally was not around, a smartphone was not around in 1997, and being able to play Backyard Baseball 1997 on that device is such a cool experience. And there are a lot of technical challenges that make it a very different type of game. We know that it's a very imperfect game because we don't have source code to make a lot of the changes that modern games would have. For example, having it be full screen. That's not something that we could change the aspect ratio of because of the source code. So we have to make the aspect ratio smaller on a phone. It's not something that people can really see on a computer because that's a one-to-one device. But that's an example of something that we knew was going to be imperfect, but it was either bring it back or have it gone forever. And so I was like, let's bring it back, and I think fans will understand.
There's two parts about the bring it back that I wanted to talk about. The
Sure.
first part is actually for the the kids, right? So kids had
Yes.
a lot. Obviously, kids were not even born that you're trying to target. But what's been at least a part, right? Is that the
Yeah.
core target is right for kids. So
Yeah.
what is it like to kind of, if you don't have necessarily, you have some challenges technically to make it like a game that they'd be more experienced and more familiar with. What have been the opportunities and challenges bringing it to back to game to kids that maybe kids are not familiar with?
Well, it has been incredibly encouraging because the game holds up. The game really holds up. And right now we have baseball 97 and soccer 98 that are out. And it has been a lot of parents who have grown up playing these games, even getting to play them again themselves. We have a lot of millennial parents who play themselves too. But they trust this franchise, which is really important. Is It's different than the other games that are out there. Our game that's on the phone has no data tracking, no ads, no microtransactions. It's comedy, it's PG, there's no violence. All of those are, really not, there are not a lot of children's games right now that are super popular that are like that. And so parents are recommending this to their kids and buying it for their kids, and they're having a interesting play pattern that has come back of playing it together, like how people remember huddling around a computer in the 90s. That's how parents and kids are interacting with it, which is a much different kind of experience of a video game playing, and they're taking turns, and it's a very communal experience, which is really nice from a play pattern perspective.
Yeah, and that actually was going to be the flip part of that question, which is I actually wrote about this for John Wall Street, which is adults are some of the biggest buyers of toys for themselves
Yes.
or for nostalgia reasons. So on the flip side, how do you kind of market And obviously seems like the nostalgia element is a big part of this. How do you
Yep.
market to adults so that they do want to share it to the kids or bring it back? And is that an explicit, which it sounds like it is, explicit part of your strategy?
It absolutely is. And the 2024, we launched in, or we made this announcement in August 2024. And it was really a campaign, um, albeit a grassroots campaign, but one that was for a millennial audience to be like, your favorite childhood brand is back. And it doesn't hurt that so many professional athletes and celebrities who have real cachet with kids talked about this as a brand that they like. And that really gave it a cool factor. And that's important because there aren't a lot of children's brands that are super cool with adults. And that is important because if an adult or somebody that a kid looks up to is saying, "Oh, I love this game," and it's not for little kids, it's for everybody, that is really validating and also really like inspires kids to try it and play it on their own. And that's been, we've gotten a lot of organic uh, media because of that. People who just, I'll give you a couple of examples, but Bobby Witt Jr. used a Pablo Sanchez baseball bat for Players Weekend, and he happened to hit a home run with the bat, and the bat went viral as like a really cool Pablo Sanchez bat. But people who are fans of his got to see like their favorite athlete talking about how, the magic of Pablo Sanchez. And they're like, who is this guy? And, the Kelseys famously talked about it on their podcast. And Jason and Travis talked about how it was their favorite game when the baseball and football were their favorite games when they were kids growing up. And, you know, people look up to them. And I think that was really helpful for kids to find a great game that was accessible, that they could actually play.
Well, before I want to tackle that a little more detail, but who is Pablo Sanchez and like how
Oh,
did,
yes.
yeah, just so
Pablo
the audience
Sanchez
will.
is your favorite athlete's favorite athlete. He is the greatest of all time. He is a little boy who does not speak any English. He only speaks Spanish, but he speaks the language of sports. And he just is. It has the greatest stats in the game. And even when the professional characters came in, Pablo was always the one that people wanted to pick. And it's he's got like incredible lore around him, even amongst professional athletes. He gets listed as greatest athletes of all times. He gets listed with all of the greats, like every time there's a giant list. And he's just a fictional kid, but he obviously represents a lot more because he's little, he's young, he doesn't speak English, he's got this little belly that's always hanging out because his clothes are too small on him, and he looks so unassuming, but is great. And I think what people love about him, not just is his greatness, but is he's very relatable as a character. Of like, he doesn't look like someone that is going to be the best athlete ever, but he is. And that is why I think kids really gravitate towards him and adults really gravitate toward him.
And how did you make the connection with Bobby Witt so that the bat could be used in a game? And how did he find out about that this was coming back?
So it was a little bit coincidental. I had, met with some other people, told them that the brand was coming back, and they were at a baseball bat company called Victus, and it's a Philly-based company, and they had made a Pablo Sanchez bat. And they had actually made it originally for Jason Kelsey because it was a local. And when all these connections got made, this guy was like, I know this girl, I got to introduce you to her. And so they introduced these two guys to me, and they were like, could we use this for Players Weekend? And I said, sure. And they had a few different players that were going to use the bats. And then they came back and said, Bobby Witt Jr. wants to use this bat, but he wants to be the one to use, like, to really get the power of Pablo. And I said, sure, let's do it. I said, he's going to probably hit a home run and it's going to be great. And I'm obviously joking around about that. And fast forward like a week later, he's obviously batting. I'm at my friend's engagement party and my phone is blowing up. And I like run into the bathroom and I'm watching the baseball game. I'm like, oh my gosh, he just hit a homer.
Yeah.
Someone was probably listening to me in the bathroom
Yeah.
stall cheering.
Well, I think that obviously it tests the power of the brand, but one thing, obviously you mentioned how the Kelceys found out about this, but the Kelce, Bobby Witt, as famous as he is, and great baseball player as he is,
Yes.
obviously the Kelceys have become one of the more famous, if not the arguably most famous brothers in maybe in pop culture. So like when they talked about it, what was that like? And how has that kind of helped with the brand development?
It was less exciting for me than we wanted it to be because I had not closed on the deal yet. And so I was actually extremely nervous when they brought it up on their podcast and everybody all of a sudden started to talk about where are the rights to Backyard Sports? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been working so hard on this whole thing and maybe it's all gonna go away. But it didn't. And it wound up being just an awesome thing after the fact, after everything was timed. It was great because, we had these brothers that love the game that obviously are super beloved across pop culture, but across sports too. And, it was awesome to have them kind of validate the brand. And then when we officially announced it, they talked about how excited they were to have manifested this from their podcast, and maybe they did. Maybe they did.
Yeah, at least from their perspective, right? So.
I mean, who knows? Let's have them manifest more stuff from their podcast.
Yeah, right.
I like them.
Well, I guess manifesting more stuff, and you don't have to obviously go into specific product launches and dates, but like you had this, you bought the franchise, you have some games that have been released. So what's the kind of the short, medium, long-term vision of Backyard Sports, and how do you hope to grow the brand?
Yeah, so, of course, I originally went into this to create more great media for kids and that was not and kids and families and that wasn't necessarily going to be all of these classic games. The beauty of the classic games is one, they get to be preserved forever on modern devices and kids and families and, the future get to play these games forever. But also I didn't know that was going to happen. So we actually went into production on a brand new Backyard Sports title, like pretty quickly after this all got started. And so we are set to come out with one, hopefully sometime next year. And we're really excited about this new Backyard Sports title. So that's all I can really say on it.
Well, on that specific title, but I think there's a vision for the company, right? Obviously, there's a vision to build the company beyond. Games are important, obviously, video games, but to maybe have a broader lens of what you can do. So you just talk about kind of where you see the company going.
So, I look at this and, I guess this is audio only, but for people who are listening, like I have Snoopy stuff in my apartment all around me, and the Peanuts is very inspirational to me as a brand because they had the comics that got started from it, but then they expanded into television and film and toys and books and all sorts of different products. And so I look at that a lot of like, how can you keep brand integrity, which the Peanuts has done for almost 6 decades? How can you keep the brand integrity for Backyard in that same way, but really make it last for a long time across families and make it an experience that you don't feel like you have to grow out of it, you can grow with it. And actually that's been a really important factor of how we're designing our games and our content. But for the games, in terms of accessibility, this new Backyard title will be the most accessible sports game that's ever been on the market. So we have everything from, the original kind of brand goal, which is to get kids to learn about sports and be able to learn the rules with an easy access point, all the way to a super gamer mode. So if you were a millennial fan who grew up with this and still wants to have a fun experience playing our games, we have a level and a zone for you to play in. That was really important to us, is that just kind of like Mario Kart, we look at ourselves very much in that kind of way of, yeah, Mario Kart is adorable and for kids, but it's also for families and adults who might want to play it too.
And then is the goal to potentially repartner with the teams leagues, or is it to have its own kind of separate
So
space?
you'll find out very soon who might be a part of the brands again. But the goal very much is there's two things. One, we want to make sure that our characters are absolutely the main characters in it. And so people, especially for kids, like they need to fall in love with our cast and crew of characters and our teams and the lore. But we also know what the original brand integrity was, which is being able to take professional athletes and leagues and being able to have them appear in some way like kids do in their backyards. So we're really acknowledging of that and figuring out very creative ways to make that happen.
And then as we get towards the end of the discussion, two final questions we try to ask to all of our guests is, obviously, we're talking about games, there can be a lot of data, a lot of elements of data technology. So from your perspective, how important is understanding data, either from the product development side, the marketing side, or some combination of both?
It's extremely important, and you have to be careful when you have any product that's children focused, but the really another benefit of having these classic titles being able to be relaunched, especially when they first came out, to have it come out on Steam, which is not really a children's platform. It's more for adults and millennial players. We got a lot of data on where people were using them, who was playing these types of games. We were incredibly encouraged that we had a split audience of male and female players, which is not really the case for most sports games. And that was probably one of like the coolest data points to find out. But this in 1999, Backyard Football was a cereal box game. And so people from around the US got it in their Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and that was the prize inside. And so, which is an incredible prize to get a CD-ROM. Like that is an amazing prize.
Yeah, right.
So we have a lot of, moms and dads who played this game or played it, with their siblings when they were growing up. And those are the people who are purchasing it for their kids to play now. But it's so cool to see how many, obviously I'm a female founder and a big sports fan, and it's amazing to see how many women and now girls are interested in this brand too.
Yeah, so I would say that's an explicit goal, right? Is to reach female audiences and demographics.
Well, and I gotta give so much credit to the original Humongous team, because they were so ahead of its time. Like these games had an equal boys and girls playing in the backyard with equal playing abilities. And that just, you still don't have that in video games and game culture, where it's really truly equal. And that is like, if you want to have the best team in the game, you're probably picking a pretty diverse group of players to be on your team.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, right? And I think that's a good point. And the idea of, either directly or because of the rise of women's sports and the importance of women's sports, particularly in the sports industry, the idea that the game captures that element within it is definitely makes it more attractive to all demographics, but particularly the female demographic.
Absolutely. But, I think what is special about this is like, I grew up very much of like, I played on a boys basketball team, and, I was like, kind of that, you can do anything type of vibe. And my mom and dad were like, sure, she wants to play basketball, she'll go play at basketball, whatever. And so I grew up like playing with my brother and my cousins, and Then going to various activities that they went to. And I always was like, oh, I wish that they had more opportunities. And this game showed it. This game literally showed, yeah, we've got all the kids in the backyard playing together, which is really amazing. And I will say, the elementary school that I grew up going to, it was called the Rovinia Lunchtime Football League. And anybody of this era will know what I'm talking about, but they had a co-ed lunchtime football league that everybody in the school basically played in. And I was like, it's just like backyard. Like I'm just playing with everybody. All the girls did it, all the boys did it, and it really mimicked the game. So it was it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, kind of a full circle type of deal, right? Yeah,
Totally.
coming back together.
Yeah, I can't tell. I'm only 5'1" and very little, so it's never gonna be a player, but I could play the flag football.
Yeah, flag football, backyard football. That's the main thing.
Exactly.
So final question. We were connected through Zach Oliver, who was went through the Masters of Sports Administration program, has participated in this podcast. So one of the final questions we asked is, obviously you're growing your brand, you're potentially looking to hire some folks. We have students who are interested in breaking in, not just in the sports industry, but I wouldn't even call this adjacent, but obviously video gaming, the intersection of gaming and sports. So as you're looking to build your team, what are the types of skills or backgrounds or experiences you're looking at, as your team hopefully continues to grow?
Well, I look at it as something that's bigger than a video game company. It's really a full stack franchise. And so everything that is, out there, we want to be aligned with top brands, and we want to be kind of side by side on shelves with them, whether it's, a virtual shelf or an actual physical shelf. So that is obviously video gaming, but we are extending into television. We are extending into film. We are extending into products. And so for me, I think when people are looking at this type of business and approaching it, it's about creativity. It's about entrepreneurial spirit of like, where could this product show up, and where could these characters show up, and what makes it good storytelling? Because at the end of the day, the storytelling, if it doesn't make sense for the characters, we're not going to do it. We've had, tons of gambling companies or alcohol companies that have reached out. That's just something we're not going to do. But, when we think about a grocery store and you think about healthy food and snacks, well, maybe there's a company that parents are going to buy for their, after kids are playing soccer, and they want us to be on a healthy snack brand. Those are the types of things that like we really think about as we extend outside of just media culture, is who else could come into this with good ideas and be able to execute on them, and also not get kind of shut down by things not working out all the time. Still starting.
So you are thinking about, you mentioned not necessarily having advertising, but you are thinking about integrating like product integrations potentially directly into the game if they fit the storyline of the characters.
The product, the companies that we partnered with in licensing and merchandising has absolutely been a part of the, as a startup, you want to be really creative about how you're marketing your product. And so, we, for example, partnered with Homage, who did these, or Homage, however you say it, but they've done really great shirts, and, they are known as like a retro t-shirt company with huge reach. And so when we announced that Backyard Baseball 97 was out, we did a drop with them at the same time. So a lot of people found out that our brand was back, possibly through their shirt advertising, but it worked for both of us. Is like people found out we were back, and then they got the shirt and they got the game. And we think about that a lot of, how we can be creative about our drops, and be intentional about marketing, whether it's paid, whether it's earned, or whether it's planted, like, having somebody hit a homer with a bat. But yeah, we have intentional.
Yeah, well, it can't be more intentional than somebody hitting a home run when they're up to play. So
I mean, I will say there is a power of Pablo, because I sent out a jersey to Baker Mayfield, who I knew was a backyard fan, and he wore it. He wore it and had in like the before the game and after the game, but he had the greatest game of his whole career after wearing that jersey. And I'm like, just let every other, athlete know that if you just, it's almost like the like Mike's shoes, like you'll play better. I'm like, yeah, you put this jersey on and all of a sudden you've got like this Pablo magic spirit.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Michael also, even though I know it's audio, you have the Michael Jordan shoes in the background. So I think you've
Yes,
gotten all your stuff in the background in the podcast, which is
if
good.
people can't tell from my accent, I am truly Chicago through and through. I obviously taught in Chicago and I live here now and I love it. But yeah, I mean, I think that is my own backyard, right? Like it's the Chicago sports scene and some of the greatest marketing and advertising for sports brands ever was stuff that I grew up watching and looking at of like, wait, you can take a shoe and put it in a city's colors and what does that do? And you kind of get a lot from being around here.
Yeah, I agree with that as I also live around here now, and I've been here for a while. So Lindsay, thank you for the time. Thank you for joining us. It was a great conversation and looking forward for everybody hearing it. And it was great to have you.
Thank you so much.